and we'll get started in about a minute and a half as everyone's logging on and getting ready to go tonight. Glad you're here on this Friday evening. Hey, put in the chat for me just so I can kind of hone in some of my talking points today. Are you taking the SAT tomorrow, like it looks like Tyler is, or are you just here to practice for a future SAT? Let me know that if you can, and we'll get started in about a minute. I've got the chat pulled up, and I'll tell you the plan here once 1 minute's up. Again, if you're just joining us, when are you taking the SAT? We got a lot of people taking the SAT tomorrow, but let me know if that's you. Let me know if you're taking it in a later date. And again, I'm glad you're here if you're just joining us. I know people are logging on. Again, in the chat, let us know when you are planning on taking the SAT. Hey, the good news is you can take the SAT multiple times. Most people take it 2 or 3 times that I talk to. I don't have any stats on that, but it seems like a lot of people take it at least twice. The nice part about that is you can learn from any mistakes you make, timing-wise or otherwise. So I see someone just said, I'm taking it tomorrow and probably October 2 or maybe October 2. Those are the big ones coming up. So we got a lot of people here tonight that are taking it tomorrow. Just so we can kind of catch you all up to speed on what to expect tonight. I think tonight will go pretty quick. I'm going to talk for a bit about English. At about the halfway point of the hour, I'm going to pass it on to Marcy. She's been with you this week with the math side of the SAT. She's going to take us home here the last half an hour, and that will launch us into getting ready for tomorrow for some of you. So I know it's late depending on what time zone you're in, but let's get started here. Again, we'll talk about English for the first half hour. We'll talk about math for the second half hour. As we talk about English, if you were with me on Monday, this past Monday, I talked for a good hour. We did some practice questions on the SAT reading portion. That is the first exact thing that you'll do tomorrow morning or when you take the SAT, when your proctor says go. So we'll talk about that. And then the second portion, you're going to be taking SAT English writing and language. That is not the essay. That is not a writing test in terms of anything that you're producing. That is when you are the reviser. I did a stream on that on Wednesday. We're not going to have a lot of time to practice tonight. If you have like actual practice questions, just because we're going quick, it's just one last hour of review and reminders for all 4 parts of the SAT, and we'll get going. If you want more practice immediately after our live session tonight, you can go ahead and jump in to some replays that we've done this week. We literally had 4 streams, one for each part of the test, Monday through Thursday, where Marcy and I both did a lot more practice questions. Again, so I'm seeing the chat. Some of you, this is your last SAT. Some of you, this is your first time taking the SAT. Some of you, this is your first of many. Some of you, this is your last of many. So let's go ahead and just do some reminders. Again, the real purpose tonight, I'm going to be honest with you. You're not going to, I want to say this like thoughtfully, you're not going to like learn a bunch of things that you didn't know 2 minutes ago tonight. I want you just in a good headspace and ready to go for this really important big day tomorrow that a lot of you have, or some reminders for when you do take this in October. So today is really just like, hey, breathe, make sure you've got, just like a good head on your shoulders mentally to get into this exam. So today we are going to spend a good chunk of time. If you were with me Monday, Wednesday, I'll talk about some of the same things, but I want you to hear them a couple of times just to make sure, okay, you're thinking about the most important things. So let's jump in to our slides. We will do a few practice questions, but the majority of our time tonight is just some reminders, some time strategies, some test-taking strategies. I'll tell you any hints that I have, any tips that I have to be successful on the SAT English. And again, pretty soon Marcy will come on and do the same for math. So if you see the term or the letter or the acronym EBRW, that simply means evidence-based reading and writing. And you all know a perfect score on the SAT is 1,600. That does happen to some students, but very, very, very rarely. So college does not expect you, any university is not expecting a perfect score here for sure. But just so we can talk about the score, 800 of those points come from English, 800 of them come from math. When it comes to English, it's broken down equally into two parts. Part one's the larger part. That's our reading test. That is actually 65 minutes. Seems almost twice as long. It's not quite, but it feels like twice as long as the part two. But remember, part one and part two are weighted equally. I want to talk about that. So part two is 35 minutes. We're going to just break down and do some reminders on both of these before we get into a couple of practice questions tonight to end the English portion of the stream. But here's my reminder. Part one, you might feel like you got knocked over a little bit. Your brain might start getting numb because you've got to read 5 passages really quickly. You've got to bring your best for 65 straight minutes. You will take a pause. It'll be a couple-minute break just to get a brain break in, get a quick drink of water, do what you got to do. You can get up and stretch during that break. But make sure you're ready to go. Make sure you're fresh getting into part two. Part two, 35 minutes goes fast. I'll talk about some timing as we go tonight. But my reminder is, hey, if part two, less questions, but equal weight in your score, you want to make sure you're giving your best at that time. Don't let the reading test deflate you with any means. So I'm going to talk about the reading test and how it is difficult. It's a tough way to start this exam. With that in mind, my thought, and this is just my guess, is that College Board starts off part one as the reading test because they think that this is when you're at your freshest and you absolutely want to be fresh and ready to go for these passages. All I'm saying is, hey, you got to have that stamina. You got to make sure you're ready. Take advantage of those 2-3 minute breaks between part one and part two because you got to come back fresh for part two. Again, if you think about it this way, part two's questions are weighted more than part one's questions just because part one and two are weighted equally, but there's less questions on part two. So now we're going to talk about part one, the reading test. Again, if you were with me Monday, these are some high-level reminders I want you to have. So stick with it. Just make sure you're in a good brain space. And we've got some support, some Fiveable workers are in the chat if there are questions. I'm not going to be able to pause as much tonight. If you do have questions to go over them, but your question will be answered in the chat itself if I don't get to it. The reason for that is we're just going quickly, making sure we're just thinking of everything we've got to think of, and we're fresh, ready to go in the morning. So with the SAT reading, if this is your first time, definitely make sure you're ready to go here. If this is your last time taking the SAT, you know this, but let's get in the right headspace for tomorrow. It is 65 minutes. It is a long time. It is 52 questions. This is, at least when it comes to the English portions, the harder one to complete on time. So we're going to talk about some time strategies tonight. It's including reading. It's barely more than a minute per question, but you got to read the whole passage too. So it goes quick. There's 5 passages total. Here's what the passages look like. They're 5 to 750 words. Usually the literature passage will be first. That's going to be your only fiction passage. Then you'll have 4 split between science and social studies. There will be a paired passage. Remember, this one will be either a history or a science. More often than not, it's history, but be ready for anything. My reminders for you with paired passage, as you read passage 1 and 2, know that questions are going to be talking about or asking about what's the similarity, what's the difference between these two passages. What might the author of passage 2, I should say, think about what passage 1 says and vice versa. So really, you are thinking about compare, contrast. They're going to be on the same topic, but different perspectives. So it's your job. Just get in the mind of the questions. As you're reading, I'm going to talk about this. You're not going to look at the questions first. Just know I've got to be thinking what's similar or what's different between these two passages within the paired passage. And you'll see that very clearly. When I say the paired passage, that is one of the 5 passages. It's just split into 2 different pieces. Again, here's the skills that SAT tests you on. I'll let you take a look. I'll just talk through this quickly. What, again, this test is hey, how well in a time setting can you read and understand a difficult text? They're going to give you 5 of them. In a nutshell, that's what it is. There will be a couple infographic. That's just a fancy term to say, hey, make sure you are comfortable working through charts and graphs. Make sure you can just read a chart. Make sure the chart you can track to see, okay, where does it fit in with the text? If the text makes a claim, you will see evidence in a chart often, and simply the question is going to ask you, hey, what part of the chart backs up the claim that's in the paragraph that they reference? So as long as you can read your way through a graph and are comfortable with them, I'm thinking you'll get a few of these questions right. Every SAT, you'll have anywhere between 2 and 5 chart and graph questions, and I think those are doable. Actually sit there and take your time to get those right. They are worth 30 seconds of looking through the chart, making sure you're reading through it. All right, let's keep it moving. Again, 11 questions per passage. It's going to total up to 52, and there's just 4 possible answer choices, A, B, C, and D. So you definitely want to use process of elimination. Again, I started talking tonight just acknowledging, okay, you're not supposed to get a perfect score. People do, but very, very rarely. You just want to do the best you can. Knowing this, the college readiness score that College Board sets for English is just getting a little bit more than half of these questions right on the English portion, both reading and writing language. With that said, obviously that's hard. This is a hard assessment. Now, when I do this in my class, I let my students take a practice passage. I don't take it out of 10 points in my grade book, because to be ready for college, for success at a 4-year university, you've got to get like 6 out of 10 right. So that's the 60% in a grade book, but that's certainly not how this translates onto the test. So just recognizing there's going to be questions that you're going to have to guess and move on. Again, we'll talk about timing here for just a minute or two tonight. But maximize your time. Really make sure you're not getting in a negative brain space. Don't freak out if there's questions you don't understand. There will be questions most likely that you're not comfortable with, and you just got to guess and move on. And for reading, those type of questions are not because you're not prepared for an inference question or a vocab question. It's just going to be because that paragraph was so difficult to read. You're going to have to read it 3-4 times to get it, and you don't have time to do that. This is a timed test. So quick process of elimination. Take your best guess, move on. Now, with this caveat, don't waste a second. Don't give College Board any empty minutes. By empty minutes, I mean you finish in 60 minutes, you have 5 left, you close the book, you put your head down. Use that break after part 1 for your headspace break, but be all in for 65 minutes. What I mean, you have 13 minutes per passage on average. That's how 65 breaks down into 5 passages. Use every minute. Don't go too fast and end early. Really sit there, take the time to go back and forth the text to the question. But again, just make sure you're feeling comfortable and not getting too bogged down in a really difficult question. If you do finish early, definitely check your work. Definitely go back and double check the question if you did happen to skip 1 or 2. And again, know your strengths. This is something I talked about on Monday. This is something specific to SAT reading. If there's literature, there's science, there's history. If you are really strong at literature and history, but science gives you trouble, if science is passage 2, skip the entire passage, save it for last. If you often have a hard time finishing the SAT reading portion of the test. I think the majority of students who take this test struggle to finish on time with the SAT reading. The logic behind that strategy is, hey, if you have to rush on a passage, rush on one that's going to give you the hardest time anyway. Maybe SAT science passage, you'll only get 4 out of 11 questions right. If you have to rush and guess on 4 of them, I'd rather have you guess on the ones that you're less likely statistically to get right. Again, you got to know yourself. You got to know, do you have any glaring strengths or glaring weaknesses to think about? If everything's pretty consistent for you, I would just go start to finish. The only caveat with this strategy, absolutely make sure you bubble everything in correctly. Don't make any bubbling errors that will obviously be terrible for your score. And you don't want that to be the reason why you have a bad day, right? So this is a really good strategy, just practical time-wise. Just be careful with your bubbling, and I think it's worth a shot. Again, I talked about that on Monday. You might have had time to practice a little bit more. You might have already practiced the strategy before this week. Don't go in tomorrow doing anything for the first time. I really believe in that. Tomorrow on the SAT is not the day to experiment with your timing, with your strategy. Tomorrow is the day to know your game plan, and just your job is to execute it the best you can. So for those of you who've taken the SAT 3 times, this is your 3rd time or 4th time even, you've learned from the last 3 run-throughs. You have your plan. Go in with that plan. For those of you taking it the first time tomorrow, good luck. You got this. If you practiced a full-length SAT reading, learn from that timing. Did you finish too fast or did you not finish at all? And make some adjustments accordingly. But again, you don't want to go in blind, not knowing what your plan is. You don't want to be making a plan on the fly based on, oh crap, I have 20 minutes left and I'm on passage 3, right? You want to go in with a plan, but you do want to keep an eye on the clock for sure. I mentioned this. Let's talk about this. On the SAT reading, I strongly recommend don't look at the questions before you read the passage. College Board expects you to read the passage and understand the passage. I call this just investing in your question round. The more time you invest in reading and annotating and understanding the passage, the quicker you can go through the questions. They'll fall in line. There's still going to be some tough ones. Do your best to move on, but you're going to get a lot of questions right if you understand the passage. Focus on the passage, understand the passage, move on to the questions. Let's talk about timing here. Again, I said there's 13 minutes per passage. I would do half of your time approximately. You know if this will work or not, but this is my recommendation as a starting point anyway. Half of your time reading and annotating, and then just about half your time flipping back and forth to the text in your annotations to the questions. Every question that cites a line, you absolutely should flip back, look at the text, flip back, answer the question. Again, it's all about a balance. I'd rather have you spend a little bit too long on the reading than a little bit too less time on the reading. It's, again, you got to make sure you understand the passage the best you can. In 6, 7, even 8 minutes, you just got to go super quick on the questions then. And everyone has to go super quick on the questions. That's part of the deal here, right? We got to go at a really quick pace. Move with confidence. Don't feel defeated if you do have to guess on a few questions because of time. Everyone has to guess on a few questions because of time. And that's part of the deal. I want to talk about annotations, then we're going to pivot to SAT Writing and Language, Part 2. Again, I only emphasize annotations on the SAT reading. The SAT reading is going to give you 5 passages that are pretty difficult. So annotations, I really am a big believer in my class. I really emphasize them. Some of my students I've talked to on Fiveable say, I love annotations. Some of my students say annotations are terrible. They're a waste of time. Here's what I tell them. Annotations, the way I recommend them, are not a waste of time. They're an investment into the multiple choice, just like the reading is. Thinking about what to annotate is not easy, but that's the whole point of them, right? They keep you engaged. They make sure you're comprehending. You're just doing a quick marginal note on what the main idea of the paragraph is or the chunk of text is. They save you time when you're answering your multiple choice because you're going to look at your annotations before you're going to look at the text to reground yourself. Here's how I recommend annotating. Underline key phrases as you go. That takes 0 time. You're reading anyway. And then every chunk of text, sometimes it's a paragraph, sometimes you got to chunk it yourself because the paragraphs are so long. You're jotting down a quick bullet point summary, not a full sentence. You're not writing a ton. I tell my students, take 3 to 5 seconds to just jot something down, move on. The last thing is clarifying vague pronouns. That means if there's an it or a they, you're circling it. You're making sure you're drawing a line back to what it refers to. If it wasn't immediately clear, that takes 2 seconds. If you don't understand it, it takes more time, but you got to understand it to understand the text. Once you understand it, it takes 2 seconds. That is going to save you time if you have to come back to that part of the text for a question. You're not going to want to reread, oh, wait, what was that they referring back to? Track it for yourself. Save yourself a lot more time than 2 seconds if it happens to be a question. All right, everybody. We're going quick through reminders. Again, just know that there's support in the chat for you tonight. I've only got 10 more minutes with you. We're going to knock out SAT writing and language a lot quicker, and we're going to do a few practice questions here that are different than Wednesday, but they'll look similar if you happen to be with me on Wednesday. And I do see some familiar names in the chat. All right. As I said, SAT language is 35 minutes, 44 questions. That is 11 questions per passage because there are 4 passages. If you're good at math, I said this on Wednesday, you already noticed there's more questions than minutes. So this is super quick. All right, with these passages, they're shorter, they're easier to understand, they're on more accessible topics. Topics are going to be from history or careers or science. My quick practice round tonight is going to be on careers. Going to get just a few questions just to kind of make sure, okay, yeah, we got this. We got our confidence up. We can come in and do this really well tomorrow or October. Here's the skills we're testing. The biggest one I like to emphasize is organization and flow of language. A lot of this test, again, you're putting the editor or reviser cap on. Think of it as you have a draft of a passage or a piece of writing, and you are making it better, either in isolation, like with punctuation or verb tense, or in bigger picture, like organization or just like flow of thought. If you did not see my stream Wednesday, go check that out. We did a lot of good practice. We had a really great work through some problems opportunity on Wednesday. So I've only got a few questions tonight, but we had more opportunity on Wednesday. All right. Interacting as an editor, just want to emphasize that's how you are viewing this exam or this portion of the test. So I don't recommend annotating unless you want to. If that helps you, do it, absolutely. But these are so much more accessible passages that it's not nearly as vital to be successful. And you're not going to be flipping back and forth. You're not going to read the whole text and then the questions. You're going to pause. You're going to read every word, but you're going to pause every time you get to a question. You're going to answer the question. You're going to move on. So that will go a lot better, or just a lot quicker, I should say. I will tell you this, although there's a lot of questions for the minutes, I think more students finish this portion of the exam, every question with confidence, than the SAT reading. So the SAT reading has a lot more reading. It's more difficult. You got to do a lot more flipping back and forth. This one, you can move at a fast pace. Here's my caveat. Don't move at such a fast pace that you don't have an opportunity to feel good about each question. Of course, don't get bogged down for 3-4 minutes on one question. That's going to set you behind schedule. Take your best guess, flag it for yourself, come back to it if there's time. But don't fly so quickly because of time that you're not looking at it in like using process of elimination. So again, you'll get a feel for it if you've taken some practice rounds, but this is less than a minute per question. That actually goes pretty quick. Most people finish early. Don't finish 10 minutes early here. Go at a pace with confidence. Just make sure you're on pace to get to every question. Same thing as what I was talking about. Here, you're not going to look at the question first, but every time you get to a question, you're going to finish that sentence, answer the question, and then move on. So a little different strategy here, just because this is a different format than SAT reading, part 1. I mean, I've been talking about, if you want to just break it down, it is less than 9 minutes per passage, and you got 11 questions in that time. So 11 questions per 8 minutes and 45 seconds. Even though you're going quick, I really emphasize this. Read every single word. Read every single word, because you're not going to be good at those flow of thought or organization questions if you don't know how the passage started. Okay. Hey guys, I know that was quick. Thanks for sticking with. I've got 3 practice questions tonight before I pass it over to math. And Mark's is going to run you through some quick overview tips and tricks, a little bit of practice in math. First, let's do 3 SAT. We're going to do SAT writing and language. This is the same resource I pulled from Monday and Wednesday, but it's different questions. It's a different passage. We're just going to look at the first 3. We'll do this pretty quickly. We'll try to do this in the next 5 minutes. We'll be done with these. So we're going to use the chat. I'm going to read it. I'm going to show you the question. Put your answer in the chat for number 1 once we get there, and I'll just tell you the answer and make sure we understand it. We'll do 3 quick rounds. Now, question 1 is not until the bottom of this paragraph. I just got done talking about this. I really believe it. You got to build up to it to be most successful. You can read this quickly. You can read with me, but it would take, if I was reading independently, 20, 30 seconds to get there. It's worth the time. Let's jump right in, and then we'll see what you got for number 1. When I left my office job as a website developer at a small company for a position that allowed me to work full-time from home, I thought I had made it. I gleefully traded in my suits and dress shoes for sweatpants and slippers, my frantic early morning bagged lunch, packing for a leisurely midday trip to my refrigerator. The novelty of this comfortable work from home life, however, blank quickly. This is a verb tense question. Go ahead and look at it. A, B, C, or D. I said blank because A, no change, is just as likely to be right or wrong as B, C, and D. I've got some questions coming in. I got some answers coming in. I'm just pulling up the chat, seeing there's a lot of really good questions. Thank you for our Fiveable workers for getting those and giving us some support. Get those answers in. We're going quick tonight just so we can get through everything. One last run through, making sure we're in a good spot. I'll tell you the answer in 10 seconds. We'll keep it moving. All right, everybody. As everyone who participated in the chat said, the answer is D. I got on the top of the slide there. However, wore off quickly. This is a verb tense. This is past tense, but it's actually also something else. The SAT hates being redundant or obnoxiously repetitive. So since I have quickly, and it's not underlined so I can't change it, I don't need a direct synonym promptly. So B and C are wrong, primarily because, or like for one of the reasons, because I don't need the word promptly. Okay, we're going to do 2 more quick practice rounds. We got 2 and 3 here, but let's do them one at a time. I'll read up to number 2. Within a month, I found myself feeling isolated, despite having frequent email and instant messaging contact with my colleagues. Having become frustrated, trying to solve difficult problems, finish that thought. So there's 4 options. This question does take a little bit longer than number 1 or 3. You've got to read all 4. I'm going to tell you a clue for what exactly this is asking. This, what's underlined or what's B, C, or D, is the independent clause. This is the core of the sentence. Having become frustrated, trying to solve difficult problems is modifying the subject. So choose A, B, C, or D based on what the subject is. Who is having become frustrated? Who became frustrated? Go ahead and take a look. I've got a few answers in the chat. This one does take a little bit longer. I'll give you 10 more seconds, and then I'll tell you the answer. We'll verify what you got is right, or I'll tell you what it is. All right, feeling good, everybody. Again, I know I gave you a clue, but if you get a question like that, think about, okay, what is this clause modifying? It is modifying the word I. D, I missed having colleagues nearby. Having become frustrated, I missed. The reason, these are all grammatically correct. There's no like glaring issues in terms of punctuation or anything. The reason why this one's D is because the subject I is placed right up front. Okay. We're going to do one more really quick. Look at that last sentence. It was during this time that I read about an article, blank, co-working spaces. This one probably feels pretty easy. Look at your 4 choices, put it in the chat, and then we'll wrap up the English portion of the stream. This one is just, are you comfortable with prepositions and how they're used? I just pulled the chat back up. A lot of confidence here, a lot of quick answers. Absolutely the best ones be. You're going to get some easy questions there. Do those with confidence. That took 5 seconds for us. Okay, you're going to get some hard questions, like number 2 is a little tougher. Take your time, move at a brisk pace. You got this. Remember, to be college ready in English, you've got to get about 60% of the questions right. So don't allow yourself to feel overwhelmed or frustrated when you run into the inevitable difficult question. All right, you got this. If you're taking it tomorrow, good luck. Stick on. We're going to do a quick transition to Marcy with math. I enjoyed being with you all. Have a good rest of the day.
Hi, guys. It's Marcy or Mrs. Boyd, whichever. Some of you have seen me already on some of the other math nights. If not, welcome. If so, glad to see you again. So looking at this, just kind of saying, hey, how are you feeling? You just did a half an hour of quick English and getting ready for that half of the exam. How are you feeling? If you got the ability or feel like putting that in the chat for me, let me know how you're feeling. How are you doing? A lot of thank yous. Awesome for Kevin. Rohan, yay. Uh-oh. That's all right, Ruth. All right. Good. All right. Well, I am same thing. Might be a little bit of fast pace. Great, guys. Same. Looks like people are feeling okay. Maybe not. That's all right. That's all right. Let's see how that goes in the next half hour. Okay. So just wanted to kind of give you a little mind break. That was really the purpose of that. So let's jump in. I'm going to do kind of the same thing as English, but I do have like 6 questions. So 3 from calculator, 3 from non-calculator. So if you were with me already, this is a little bit of review. So I won't spend tons of time on it because I do want to have some time for practice questions that came up in the chat a little bit. Do you know what calculator? If not, toss in there, just a Google chat, ask Siri, what calculator is allowed on the SAT? That way, I'm in New York State and we're big on Texas Instruments. But if you are Sharp or Casio or something different, I think that's the best way. Comes up with this huge chart and tells you what calculators you can or can't have. It's actually more different for the SAT to the ACT. Almost everything is allowed on the SAT. There's some limits for the ACT. All right, make sure it's charged. So if you have not charged your calculator yet, do it soon, okay? Because I don't want you to charge it overnight and then find out in the morning that for some reason it didn't charge. All right, so make sure. Also, do you know you can take a spare calculator? I tell my students take 2, and this is the time to don't share. You paid for this test, so make sure that you have one, and if it dies, you have an extra one. Okay, this is not the time to learn a new calculator. So if somebody's like, oh my God, this is the best calculator for the SAT, really not a big deal anymore. On the new SAT, all calculators are pretty much created the same or very similar. Take one that you're familiar with. You cannot use the phone calculator if you didn't know that. Good. Yeah, I'm seeing people using the TI. That's my favorite as well, the CAS, but completely up to you. All right, so overview. Similar to English, we start out parts 1 and 2 are your English, parts 3 and 4 are your math. So very first thing that I want to point out, very similar. Part 3 is the non-calculator and it's shorter. Okay, so non-calculator, it's only 25 minutes. And on the next part, it'll tell you that non-calculator has 20 questions. Part 4 is 38. So those are coming up as well. But just to kind of point that out to you, they're divided equally, but because there's more questions with the calculator, you need to move a little quicker. So these are the main math topics. And for Fiveable, we pretty much said, make sure you're concentrating on algebra, data analysis, and advanced topics. Those advanced topics, I just kind of broke down saying, especially with COVID, you know, recognizing and realizing you got some geometry and some trig, some law of some like rules for triangles, maybe some SOHCAHTOA. So those may be things you have to relook at. All right, so like I said a few minutes ago, you got 25 minutes to do 20 questions without a calculator. There are 15 multiple choice, and then there's 5 grid-in questions. That means you'll write the answer, just like when you fill out the bubble sheet for taking the test, you'll fill out your name and then you bubble it. It's the same thing. If your answer is negative 7.2, you'll write the negative sign, the 7, the period, and the 2, and then you'll bubble below it. Okay, jumping right in. I got 3 questions that I thought were problems that kind of come up for different students that I've kind of worked with getting ready for this. So first one, tossing you right into geometry. Consider the diagram given to you in the right. If this line was shifted 7 units to the right and 5 units up, what's the slope of the new line going to be? Okay. So took that picture from College Board. Do you recognize the kind of the words or the thought that this is a linear translation? It is a sliding side to side and up to down, up, down. It doesn't change the slope at all. So they could have made this a lot easier by saying, what's the slope of the line given? But they wanted to make it a geometry question. So I'm seeing some choices come in. Give you maybe 5 seconds. Think about. What I was alluding to is it really is just, do you remember that the slope is rise over run? So it's up and down, then over. So first of all the choices are negative. So that's not going to help you. This is a negative slope. It looks like the line is decreasing. Everybody that is responding in the chat so far has it right, in case you're wondering. So a couple comments here that I wrote for you is the shifting of this line is called a linear translation. Translation does not affect the slope of the line. So the slope of the original line can be found by choosing 2 of the points, whichever ones look easy to you. Count from 1, how many down and how many over. And when we do that, the 2 that we choose are -3 over 2. Okay, so we should get B. Great job with that. All right, next one I did because I don't know about you, but some of my students panic if they see fractions, and they double panic if they see more than 1 letter. Okay, so those kind of conditions there, I don't know about you, but if they make you nervous, it just says, because we might have somebody that says, well, if the answer is 0, I don't have to do the problem. So that's why they put it there, to say it's the same as them writing if the problem does exist. All right. So what is y in terms of a? So they want us to solve for y. Okay. This is called a proportion when you have 2 fractions that are equal. And so what we're looking at is, are you somebody who is thinking of cross multiplying? Or are you thinking of getting common denominators, right? So it really kind of depends, even if you are a common core state or not, right? So I think of cross multiply, but some students think let's just get common denominators. Either way is okay. I need you to get the y alone. I am loving the answers coming in. How would you start this? So not all, but the goal is to get y alone. So I did cross multiply. So I said 2 times y equals 4. times a minus 1. I did the distribution rule, distribution property. I really don't have to show it or explain it. I can do that in my head. I don't have to show work, whatever you decide. But that's the answer that they're looking for. The other answer that they might give is the answer right above it. They might leave 2 parentheses a minus 1. But just so you know, the correct answer is A. So I just said, hey, did you get it right? Doing okay so far? Everybody's looking good that's participating. Next one, I thought I'd throw kind of a doozy at you, really, because I know this is something taught like after. So you learn it in Algebra 1, but I had some people the other night that asked about equations of circles. So it told me that they were a little maybe worried they were going to forget it. So I grabbed this question. It is a completing the square. You learn like 9th grade, maybe 8th grade, you learn it, but then you don't remember it sometimes, right? Especially if you're in a school that does algebra, then geometry, and then goes back to an algebra 2 or pre-calc, all right? So what we're going to have to do is we're going to look at this. This is a grid in, so they're not even going to give us the choices, right? Now, what a lot of my students would do, if you're going to make a mistake, you're going to look at this and you might remember, oh, I don't know, circle is something about x squareds and y squares equals radius squared. And if you were with me the other night, I did talk about that. The equation of a circle is really the distance formula, which is equivalent to Pythagorean theorem, okay? So what some students are going to do is say, oh, 144. So it's the square root of that, which is 12. Well, there's a couple of problems with that. One, the 12 would be your radius squared, and they're asking for the diameter. So some people, if you got that, you'd say, oh, 24. That answer is going to be wrong, but it'll be the best wrong answer, I guess. Okay, so this one I may give you maybe 10 seconds. I see a couple people put answers in, and that's pretty cool that you're working that quick. Let's see how you do. I don't want to spend too long, because if you're just sitting there because you have no clue how to do it, I also don't want to waste your time. Okay, so on the next sheet, I said no choices are given for the problem, so it will be a user created. They call it a grid in, an answer that's bubbled in. I wrote there, and I tried to use some different colors to kind of help you see it. It is completing the square. Now, what I did here is I used commutative rule to move the x terms together and the y terms together. If you remember completing the square, what you're going to do is take your x term, cut it in half, and then square it. -6 cut in half is -3. Squared is 9. Okay. Now remember that rule. Whatever I do to one side, I got to do to the other side. It's like keeping that scale balanced. The same thing with the 8y. Cut it in half and get 4. Square that and get 16. Now I got to add that. Now I did continue it because, you know, if you wanted to know how to finish it, or if they asked the center of the circle, it is true that it would be 3, -4. But in this case, what I have to do is take the right-hand side, combine all those numbers, and I get 169. That is the radius squared. So my radius is going to be the square root of 169, which is 13. So my diameter, and those who got it, great. Oops. My diameter is 26. Okay. Awesome. I'm just going to kind of let that sit just for a second in case, because I knew that that one was going to be the one that might be an issue. If you have trouble remembering, it's probably with completing the square. So if you just bear with me, I'm just going back to the original question in case, again, you want to take a picture of it to remind yourself that then there's the solution to it. Okay. Everybody good so far? I'm keeping up with the chat, so let me know. So that is my 3 questions without a calculator. Okay. And then we get into our calculator. So again, even though they're worth the same amount, our calculator question, or calculator part, which is part 4, longer and more questions. Okay, so 55 minutes, 38 questions. Now, this is the one that of the 38 questions, you'll have 30 multiple choice, and it is, I guess, easier for some than on an AP exam where sometimes you have to choose the best 2 answers. This one only, is Avery the only one that I cut out for, or can anybody else, can anybody hear me, I guess? 30 multiple choice questions, choose the best answer. Awesome. Thank you, Rohan. And then the other 8 questions are grid-in questions. And of those, it says they'll include 1 extended thinking question. And that's similar to the last English one that you did. It was like 3 mini questions kind of in with 1 passage. That's the same kind of thing. They might give you a table or a statistical study or something, and they might ask you maybe even a triangle. They might ask you the slope of something and then ask you to do trig. Okay, so that's what they mean by the extended thinking question. Okay, so moving on, let's look at the next one. So calculator question. Again, a geometry one, because I thought I would throw at you three equations. A system of 3 equations. Their graph in the XY plane is shown. How many solutions does the system have? Awesome. I actually am impressed. I like the speed with which you wrote the answer because, of course, 4 will be the most likely wrong answer, right? By looking for any intersection points and saying that there's 4 of them. But remember, when we look at a system of equations, it has to be all 3 intersecting at the same point. So there's 1 in the 3rd quadrant, and there's 1 in the 4th quadrant. So it is true that we only have 2 answers. Okay with that? Awesome. Next one. Algebra. Sorry. The number of solutions is how many? All 3. Can you count on there? And I said, count 2 for me. And we should get B. Okay, so good job with that. All right, so the last 2, one's a word problem, one is a trig problem. Okay, so I'll read it just in case anybody can hear me but is having trouble with any of the technology. But let's look through the algebra. When a scientist dives into salt water to a depth of 9 feet below the surface, the pressure due to the atmosphere and surrounding water is 18.7, what we call PSI, pounds per square inch. As the scientist descends or goes deeper, the pressure increases linearly. When he is at a depth of 14 feet, the pressure is 20.9 psi. If the pressure increases at a constant rate as the scientist's depth below the surface increases, which of the following linear models describes the pressure in pounds per square inch at a depth d below the surface? Okay, I wanted to be quiet just because I know some people need to go back and kind of read that in their own words. And as you notice, sometimes what comes out of my mouth isn't what's in the word problem because my brain just kind of does that, right? So as you're reading, you almost do abbreviate or make things sound a little easier to your brain. So first of all, the frustration might be, this is like an English passage, just to ask me a question about the slope of a line. So that absolutely can be frustrating, right? Especially if it's the reading that is the struggle. Okay. And they put it in terms of salt water and pressure, and they makes you think it's physics, and that can panic people. Okay. But this really is, if we think of this as like a T chart, if we just had a slope chart with the X value and the Y value in there, and we could kind of think about what the slope is, right? So our depth is going to be our X value, our pounds per square inch, or the pressure is going to be our Y value. And then we just remind ourselves, it says linear. So that is telling us this rate of change is really just the slope. Okay. All the slopes are positive, and that should make sense because that word increases there. So they do have the word linearly, they do have increases. So hopefully that'll kind of help you in case any of the choices were negative. Okay. I love it. You guys are awesome. The people who are participating in the chat, that is also true. So what I wrote on the next page, the equation of a line, because they said linear, the equation of a line is y equals mx plus b. We see that P equals MD plus B. Now that's just really for people saying, can you put it in context of the problem? Okay. And they did say that if we go back and look at those choices, right, the P and the D might also be confusing. So P replaces the Y, right? And the B is B. Okay. So M is the slope, which is rise over run, which is 0.44. You're absolutely right. B is the y-intercept, or the value of 14.74. So I agree. The answer is B. Okay. Now, I did have somebody that I gave this problem, and I was interested to see that how they chose to use their calculator is they did a T-chart where they have a 0.9, comma 18.7, and a second 0.14 and 20.9. And then they used their calculator and they did a linear regression using those 2 points, and the calculator gave them the answer. Right? So especially if you're a TI person, that comes up, y equals mx plus b, where m is 0.44, b is 14.74. And if you have the diagnostics turned on, that would then tell you how good of a fit your answer was, and both would be 1. Okay, so just another thought. Some people might graph those 2 points, plot the points. Some people just might sketch it on a piece of paper, might actually do the algebra. 20.9 minus 18.7 over 14 minus 9. However you want to do that is absolutely fine. It is true that the correct answer is B. Okay? All right, you guys are doing awesome. So the last one, I kind of took almost what I think of as like a ceiling truss, or there we go, a truss, right? Or like think about this as a roof pitch. All right. So consider the right triangle. What will the cosine of x be? I will give you a second to look at it and think about it. Great questions. So first, just be careful. It wouldn't be an issue because this is a grid in. So we wouldn't have degrees, right? It would be either 0.75 or 3/4. In this problem, and I think it was maybe a college board, this right angle was not labeled, but the question said it was a right triangle, right? So we weren't even told whether the two sides were equal or not. Okay, but you're right. This one did not have the triangle labeled, and it was from like an SAT type question. Okay, it gave extra information. That's where you can kind of see where I like whited something out because that was a letter Y, and it was a little worded weird in my mind. But this one did not have it. Okay. Now, and again, I threw this question on there because we had questions the other night about a little more trig, looking for trig and circle stuff. So, SOHCAHTOA means that sine is equal to or opposite over hypotenuse, cosine is equal to adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is opposite over adjacent. So, this answer for x, okay, I completely agree. It would be great if they did, and I would hope that they will, but this one did not have the right triangle, the right angle, labeled, right? This is the right angle, right? This is the hypotenuse. They're asking for cosine of x. Cosine, we need to know, is adjacent over hypotenuse. What I really like is that when you were answering, you gave the reduced answer, which is great. And it is on a calculator part. And because now graphing calculators, when you press enter, will give the reduced answer, they will expect the reduced answer. Okay. Now, the good thing is because this is a grid in, they probably wouldn't give you enough spaces to put 2, 4, divide 3, 2. Okay, because that would be 5 spaces. So chances are they'll only give you 3 spaces, 3 divide 4, or 0.75. Both would be acceptable in this case. All right, so at least that's a good thing. But I do want to kind of point out to people that you would have to know the correct. And remember what I always tell my students is sine and cosine can never be bigger than 1. So if with the given information, I mistook that and did 32 over 24, it's going to be bigger than 1. And that's not possible for cosine. Okay. So I said cosine is the proportion of two sides of a right triangle being adjacent over hypotenuse. Notice that the final answer should be reduced when we bubble it in. I just left 3/4. You can also bubble 0.75. They will accept both, and both should be there in the choices. You should have decimals allowed as well. Okay. Looks good. Awesome. Okay. Same thing. You guys got this. I wanted to leave another minute or so just in case there were any other questions or last minute, formulas that I can kind of cram into your brain or any kind of questions about calculators. I'm going to leave the last slide that we have up is always the reminder that we are here, even if you have a question that comes into your brain late tonight or, before the October exam, you can always send us an email or hit us up on social media, right? And we will always kind of help. Can you do another long word problem if you have one? Sure. Let's look for another word problem if you have kind of joined me one of the other days. I may just be able to pull one of those. Let's see. Oops. Might just have to pull one from last night. I'm thinking I had a word problem in that. If you just give me 1 second, I just have to switch what I'm sharing, okay? So I need to, I'm going to take off that Where are we? So I took off that one. I just want to share my Chrome tab. We will do this one. All right. All right, let's see if I can share this again. I am just going to share the entire screen because it seems like I keep pulling the wrong. There we go. All right, so I am looking for another word problem. Okay, something like this. This is one we did the other day. We were talking about median, but the SAT is going to try and pull real world questions, right? So this is a tech company buying computers for its employees. Six of them were $1,600 each. 4 were $1,200 each. And then the extras were $900 each. How many were at $900 each if the median price is $1,200? Well, the issue for this is if we write these out, and that's on my next screen here, I said, I don't know how many are at 900, but I know there are 4 at 1,200 and 6 at 1,600. What I want to actually look at is where would my median be? My median be here or here? Okay, so this is a good one because it's not only a word problem, but it's data analysis, right? And so some of that statistics bothers people, right? So it's not a calculator problem. This really isn't a difficult one. It's just maybe drawing it out and thinking about it, right? So to get the maximum, which is what the question asked, what's the maximum number that the 900 could be? This one would be our median. What that means then is we have 1, 2, 3, and 6, which would be 9 to the right of it, which then tells me there has to be 9 to the left of this 1,200 or 9 900s. Okay, so I thought that was a decent, I'm going to go back, a decent word problem because you really had to think about the translation of the English, this word problem, into what am I going to do for median? Remembering what median is, I got to order things from smallest to biggest or biggest to smallest in order to solve that. So I would say that's one that kind of came to my mind. I think that's the biggest. You guys can jump in if anybody was here the other day. I think that was the biggest one probably. We did have this one also where we talked about the sides of right triangles in a 30, 60, 90 triangle and a 45, 45, 90 triangle. So little trig ratios. I'm going to go to the next page just to show you. Maybe I will. Okay. So 30, 60, 90, the sides are in the ratio of 1 to radical 3 to 2. 45, 45, 90, they're in a 1 to 1 to radical 2. So this really, if I knew that, this is really just a dilation problem. So if I know that one of the sides is 3 radical 3, the smaller side is 3. So it's this ratio dilated by 3, right? So I think if that's maybe what you were looking for. Why was it 9? Oh, okay. So let me go back to that. Okay. So this one, we're talking about the median, and we want the largest. So if you look back to this, it says, what's the greatest possible value of y? So my median is one of these, right? If I thought, what about this? My median is here. Then there are 6 above it, right? Then there must be, because by definition, the median, there must be 6 below it. So if there's 3, then there would be 3 900s, okay? But I want the biggest number. And so what I found is as I keep moving my median, still 1200, but if I say it's this 1200 is the middle, now there are 6 plus 3 or 9 scores above this 1200. Therefore, since median means middle, there's also has to be 9 of them smaller. So that's why it's 9. So it could be between 3 and 9, but the question said which is the most number of 900 computers you could have. Okay. All right. So it says I did cut out for that. Yes, I wrote an odd number. It had to be an odd number of 900. You're right. Almost like a hangman is how I think about that. Yeah. All right. Well, I just want to be mindful. You will absolutely be here if you do have more questions, but I do want to say farewell and log off so that you have to, let me see, you have to have more than 6 900s to cross out the 1600s. Great explanation. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so we are going to kind of finish up for now and sign off. I hope that that was so helpful to you. Get a lot of sleep tonight. Do awesome tomorrow, October, whenever you're taking the test. Okay, hit us up. Yes, of course. You're so welcome. Hit us up on social media or email if we can help you with anything. Take care and do really well. Bye, guys.